Hello, everybody. I'm here with Randy Frost, an ordained Presbyterian minister and a longtime family therapist. He has been the director of training and research at Living Systems in Vancouver, British Columbia. He's the former director of the Bowen Center in Georgetown, and he's also married with two kids and five grandchildren. And he's really excited about his effort to emphasize research in Bowen theory, which we're going to talk about today. Welcome, Randy.
Thank you. Good to be here.
I'm so glad you're here. Um, well, I guess we were talking a minute ago about kind of this shift that you started off in the theological world and ended up in the family systems world. Can you just talk a little bit about that transition, that movement?
Sure. Yeah, I grew up with a father and a stepmother, both lawyers, and went to law school out of university at Michigan. And in the first semester, I decided law was not my calling. Um, so a year and a half later, I went to Pittsburgh Seminary. And in my first year there, we had a professor of pastoral care and counseling who introduced me to systems. Uh, he had us reading Freud, Erickson,
Mm,
and also Bowen, uh, and the Palo Alto group that came out with Pragmatics of Human Communication. And I was just taken by the whole idea of relationships being so important in influencing development and contributing to the emergence of symptoms of one sort or another. I had a
mm,
mother who got depressed and was hospitalized, and so I was just taken by that. And so when I graduated from seminary, I moved to Washington to do clinical pastoral training at St. Elizabeth's Hospital, a psychiatric hospital. And that same year, I enrolled in the postgraduate program at Georgetown. So that first year was really important for me because I got in-depth training in Bowen theory. I In Elizabeth, we looked at what's unique about pastoral care and counseling that differentiates it from all the other helping professions. So that was important. And I met my wife to be, who was in a dance movement therapy core curriculum course, and we shared a class in clinical psychiatry. And the first
mm.
assignment in the class was to interview the person next to you and come up with an image that captured what you learned. So I had naturally sat down to the prettiest, next to the prettiest girl in the group, and we proceeded to know each other that way. And on from there.
What did she draw of you?
Well, back then I had a big hair standing out, and so it reminded her of a lion's mane. So that was her image, me, and mine of her was somebody who was, a butterfly coming out of the cocoon because she
Mm,
grew up in a very tight knit family in
mm.
Pennsylvania, and had just been to New York and was studying dance therapy and was kind of really striking out into the larger world.
So each of you were coming into your own, sounds like.
Yeah, yeah, kind of getting clear about what we wanted to do and where we wanted to go, and of course, falling in love. Yeah.
Uh, uh, Falling in love. There's no matter how much we research it, I don't know if we'll ever understand it completely. Uh,
Well, yeah, I have had divorces on both sides of the family going back three generations. Everybody just about got divorced, including my.
mm,
So I approached marriage with a certain amount of caution and trepidation. I never even told people I dated that I loved them. But this was different. On the first date, I knew she was the one.
Hmm. What do you think that is, Randy? That difference, like dating before, never said anything, meet a certain person, and you feel something different.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, well, after that first interview, I kind of waited to ask her out because I had a entangling alliance back in Pittsburgh that I wanted to set aside before I started dating
Mm,
her. So I let my girlfriend in Pittsburgh know that I was going to be dating. And so it was a couple of weeks later, and she was impatient, wondering why, even though we had lunch together and seemed to be hitting it off, she didn't get any invitations. But, how do you explain falling in love? I mean, certainly there was a physical attraction, but
mm,
there's also a psychological element to it that's hard. I came from a family where people kind of focused on what you were doing wrong.
mm,
And so on the first date, I managed to get lost trying to get to a movie theater, getting more and more anxious about that. Oh, this is great, really making an impression here. And she said, I don't care if we get to the theater at all. You know, she was just happy to be there with me.
mm,
This is a girl for me. Somebody
mm.
who's not going to overreact to foibles. And after that, I found my way to the theater almost immediately. We didn't see too much of the movie, but
Uh,
we got off to a great start.
no, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Uh, is that something that continued, Randy? W- the pattern of her being kind of, how did you say about foibles? Not really attentive, not worrying about him so much,
Yeah, not being critical. That
not
was
being critical. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. That was real important. Um, her dad actually died when she was 16 or so of an accident, and he was 38 at the time. He was young, and
Wow.
it really hurt her. Her mother's husband, though that was, of course, her father, but her grandmother's husband, also died at a young age in his early 40s from a botched appendix operation that, you know,
Yeah.
he apparently left one of the tools inside the person and the grandfather and developed some kind of poisoning as a result and died.
Hmm.
So I used to say, if I can stay alive, you know, I win all kinds of points, just by not dying at an early age and continuing to live on as Mary's husband. So
Well, you made it past 38.
I did. I did. So that was, you know, there was this pattern for two generations in her family,
Mm,
and she didn't want it to extend to the third, and it didn't.
beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful. What would you say, Randy? Sounds like your wife brought this behavior of not being critical that was really helpful to the relationship.
Mhm.
What would you say is one of the things that you brought that was um, bared fruit in how you guys were with each other?
Yeah, I would say it was my ability to listen and be present, even when she got anxious about something.
Mm.
So the ability to be able to talk to me about most anything, um, including some symptoms that developed the first year or two of our marriage. Uh, and, I would kid her, if you go crazy, I'll visit you in the loony bin. Not to worry. So, I think that was something I brought that she appreciated.
Yeah. It's beautiful when each can help be a source kind of calm for the other, not activate stress, do the opposite, you know.
Right, right, right. Yeah, I think that's one of the ways to think about Bowen's term of a fortunate fit in a marriage. You know,
Mm,
where the areas in your own programming that evoke anxiety are not sensitive issues for your partner. So, um, Mary's tendency not to be critical uh,
mhm,
and calm with foibles of mine really helped me. And I think I being able to be open to anything that she was on her mind or was creating some anxiety for her was uh, was a real plus. And I think that's one way to think about a fortunate fit. You can talk about sibling positions matching better or worse, but I think that how the programming from our original families
mm,
influences how we are with our partner um, is one of the things that can make a contribute to a fortunate fit in a marriage. Um, if you have a couple who one person's big focus on finances, source of anxiety growing up. Their partner grew up in a family where people were responsible, but nobody got too uptight about, whether there's enough money. You know, that person can interrupt or at least not contribute to the anxiety of their partner about finances. Whereas if
mm,
you have two people, both of whom had big anxiety issues around money, that gets to be more of a escalating tension around money in a marriage.
mm. I like that idea of just the simple uh, pattern of not contributing to the anxiety. You don't even have to calm the other down, just don't contribute to it. Can be so useful, so helpful to a couple.
Sure.
Um, that's an interesting way to think about it. I'm going to ask my clients that. How could you not contribute to increasing the tension here?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Absolutely. And if you can do that without trying to tell your partner, now don't be anxious, don't,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
uh, just not contribute to it and stay um, in a less, or a calm state in spite of your partner's anxiety. That's a way of thinking about differentiation in a marriage. If
Mm,
one person can stay reasonably calm and engaged with the other, even when they're anxious, that is one, I think, example of a better level of differentiation.
mm, mm. I like that, Randy. Um, so speaking of relationships and patterns and people managing themselves in them, I know we were talking about kind of your interest in research in the family. What are you thinking about these days? What makes researching a family difficult? What are you interested in? Where's your thinking on it?
Yeah. Um, Gosh, I guess the origin of it goes back a number of years when we had John Gottman to Vancouver
Mm,
for a conference with Mike Kerr, and uh, and I
oh,
invited everybody I knew who was either interested in research or doing research based on Bowen theory to present at the conference. I presented there, um, But he stood up, and said, Bowen theory is wrong. And these are the, and he went on to say, there hadn't been any serious research based on Bowen theory since that original NIMH stuff. Where's the research base for Bowen theory beyond the NIMH work?
Mm.
Sort of took that to heart. And so over the years, I've required people in the training program at Living Systems to do a research paper every year. First year, second year, third year. So we have people staying in the program for 15 or more years. Every year they had to do a research project. So it wasn't just doing an oral presentation, it was actually writing a paper. And then the last year I was there, I required people in our advanced group to follow a method of clinical research that I think grows straight out of Bowen's own work um, for their project that year. Uh, and I continued it with them the first year I was at the Bowen Center. Um, and it has to do, of course, with getting the facts, doing a family diagram, chronology, list of important notable events. But you're also starting with what people are describing as the reason for coming for family therapy, um, what the presenting problems are. And so part of this outline for clinical research entails the therapist beginning to envision or conceptualize the presenting problems through the lens of Bowen theory. Because usually people are thinking in terms of cause and effect. If he would just change, then my life would be better. Um, or in very individual model of
Mhm.
problems. So the therapist begins to take seriously what they're presenting, but reconceptualize it. And then the therapist is also considering um, how they want to manage themselves with the family, given the particular presenting problem and what they're learning factually and in terms of the diagram about the emotional process in the family. Um, and so that's a step in the theory or in the research. And then, and this is important to establish a baseline of functioning for a clinical family.
Mm.
Where are they starting out? How much are they cut off from their larger family? How intense is the anxiety? What are the important triangles at work? How fixed are they? How intense are the symptoms? When did they start? So you establish a baseline of functioning at the start of therapy. And then after you've spent some time with them and you've reconceptualized their presenting problem through the lens of theory, you make some predictions.
Mm.
What would it take for at least one member of this family, if they're working on themselves and have a more accurate understanding of their part in the problem, if they were able to modify that, how would that, what would theory predict about the symptom that brought them in? So you make an actual prediction in that way. And
Mm.
then over time, you know, does the prediction hold up? If not, why not? Is it because, nobody's really gotten onto the idea of taking responsibility for self or accurately understanding their part in it and working on it? Or is the therapist getting caught up in the emotional process and is not really able to be an adequate resource to the family? Um, so if your predictions don't hold up, you know, one step in is, well, why not? Uh, what does theory say about
Yeah.
what got in the way? Um, So to me, and then of course, if the theory, your prediction holds up, then that's a good confirmation of the integration of theory and therapy that was so important to Bowen. Because as you know, he developed the theory by making hypotheses based on the developing theory about what would change the problem, um, uh, and then try to implement that in psychotherapy. And if the predicted change didn't occur, either the therapist wasn't functioning according to what theory called for, or the theory needed to be modified.
Mm.
So that's that back and forth between theory and practice is what how Bowen developed the theory. All beginning really back in Menninger's with some very interesting clinical experiments. Um, but anyway, so this is just a more orderly way of saying, rather than just talk in general terms about a research attitude, let's actually take selected cases and use the theory to establish a baseline, make predictions, and try to understand, you know, what gets in the way of the prediction based on theory and families' situation that gets in the way, and then hopefully some of those predictions get borne out.
I hear you. What so you're starting with the presenting problem. Do you have does any example come to mind of what somebody might come in with?
Sure, sure. This is a family that I had worked more with the husband uh, over off and on for a lot of years. And he just, was a person who was afraid his wife was going to leave him, first of all,
Mm.
and had no understanding of why that might be the case. Um, but it
Just
really,
a fear he carried around.
yeah, it just influenced how he related to her. And kind of working
Mm.
overtime to not do anything that might lead her to want to leave. And of course, that was a turnoff. and uh, and so I began seeing him when the first marriage was sort of on the rocks. Um, but as with most folks I would see, I asked him to engage with his original family, and he did. And he learned about appearing when he was like 2 years old or so, when his mother had scarlet fever and almost died, and had a long convalescence in the hospital and then back at home. And he was a rambunctious 2 year old who was just a real uh, challenge to, you know, ride herd on. And his father was scared he was, going to be too much for his mother. So he really came down hard on him.
Mm.
And the concern was that if his mother overexerted, she'd die. And
Mhm.
and he took it a step further to assume that he may have caused her to get the scarlet fever in the first place. Well, once he developed more of a relationship, open relationship with his parents, and began to find out some of the reasons they were particularly hard on him. Not only was a 2 year old, but right through, um, that it began to make sense to him that um, he had this fear that his wife would leave him, like his mom
Mm.
die and leave.
Yeah.
So that enabled him, with wife number two and then wife number three, to do a lot better at managing himself. They were wife number two. They did great the first 2 years, and then events in her family and with her children seemed to present a problem. So
Mm.
eventually they got divorced. Wife number three, I saw her and him also. And by this time, he was really good at flagging when, wife number three had wanted him to do something and hadn't consulted him. And he could be kind of light about it. Well, I guess you don't really care what I think about this. You do things. So they had an ability to laugh about it, but he could be more of a self in the marriage
Mm.
as a result. And it's gone very well. She had three children by a former marriage. Um, Oldest doing very well. The second one struggling, but coming around. And then the third was the least functional,
Mm.
and but had periods of functioning better, and was living with her spouse. Uh, but there were conflict there, and she left and went to their to stay with them, the mother, and this longtime client was married to her, and the wife number three was really worried that they were going to be stuck with this gal. And
Mm.
it's saying, that her mother wasn't being sufficiently supportive and not taking her side and all this stuff. And wife number three was getting very defensive about that and
Mm.
very anxious about it. And there was enough of a fusion between this mom and her only daughter that the the back and forth was heightening the anxiety of each. So thinking theoretically about the problem, um, I did a history of the daughter who's in her early 30s by this time, and times in the past where she was able to function pretty well, and then kind of indicated to the mother that if she could bring down her anxiety, her daughter's anxiety would come down. Um, and there's a whole question of whether she's going to come around for Christmas and that sort of thing. I said, well, there's enough of an attachment there. Well, she may not come around for Christmas, but she's not going to cut you off, you know. And sure enough, and so things started to turn around once the mom was able to decrease anxiety. And this was critical to convey to the daughter that she had confidence she could figure this thing out with her husband and
Mm.
forward in life. And I just sort of emphasized that, you really have to believe it. It's not just the words, but convey that you're not going to get involved in trying to mediate between her and her husband. She's perfectly capable of doing that.
Mm.
So I had three sessions with her, and after the last third, I heard things have really turned around. She's gone back with her husband. Um, she's gone on for further training. She hadn't been working, and and but it had to do with the knowledge that this reciprocal interaction was driving the anxiety of both. And if the mother could cool her anxiety, the daughter would as well. And and then to convey confidence and mean it that she could figure this out, so she wasn't drawn into
Yeah.
conflict. So that would just be a recent example of having a way of thinking about a presenting problem, a baseline.
Hmm.
Started to see them when things were really going south, and she's been diagnosed with various diagnostic categories. And the mother was focused on that. I said, forget about that. It's diagnostic. you
Yeah.
know, let's focus on what you can do. So that would be, a good result, helped by the husband who sat in on the third session and had learned enough of theory and applied it that he was able to also support his wife to be more of a self with her daughter.
Mm.
Uh, and so, anyway, it's an unusual one because you had this history of, in this case, the husband working himself on his own family and with previous wives, and then able also to be a resource to the current one. So
Mm.
that would be an example of a baseline of where things were when I started to see her, um, and then where they've come out so far in a relatively short period of time.
Yeah, and a great example of using theory to guide therapy.
Yep,
Uh,
that's right.
and you're making a prediction that there's something about the interaction of the mom and daughter that's contributing to the anxiety in both of them. And if the mom can back up a little bit, calm down, that might be useful for the daughter. And you present that to the client, I'm sure, in your own unique way, and um,
Yeah,
that's beautiful.
and yeah, and they sort of went on vacation for a few days, left the daughter in their home, so just found different ways to convey their confidence in her and her ability to manage, and that was something they came up with,
Yeah.
and maintained a relationship with the husband who worked in the store where they shopped, for groceries,
Hmm.
and that maintained a friendly relationship there, and didn't get pulled into the problem of.
Yes. Kind of the parents weren't getting involved in the marriage of the daughter and her husband. They were saying, "Hey, you can figure this out." They
Yeah,
were conveying that in their own way.
absolutely. And taking a position that mom wasn't going to try to do mediation, or
Yeah. Yeah, beautiful. And that would be using the ideas and concepts and theory to guide therapy.
absolutely.
Beautiful. Randy, what's the difference? You talked in the beginning of the husband, him kind of working on himself and his family of origin.
Mhm.
How is that different than this idea of? I think people often hear it and they think about the concern, the misinterpretation is that's ruminating in the past. How is what you're describing different from getting stuck in that I'm a victim of the past, so to speak?
Yeah, well, it had to do with trying to gather facts. It's Yeah, I mean, he felt hard done by because his parents were harder on him growing up than either of his other three siblings, even though he was, straight A student, very never did anything wrong. Uh, and yet, his dad told him, if you have a single drink before you're 21, I'm going to kill you. He believed it. And then he found out that the reasons were because he was so different than they were and his siblings. He asked questions they didn't even think of. And they figured that if they were hard on him, he'd go amok. And so it wasn't, he did feel hard done by in that respect. But
Hmm.
when you're talking about bridging cutoff, it's one that he didn't have contact with them. He just didn't engage them about the past and asked the questions of them that were truly on his mind. Like, why were you so hard on me? Uh,
Hmm.
what really was going on when mom was so sick and I was a 2 year old? So it was the quest for facts that enabled him to correct or at least understand the emotional programming that he launched into adulthood with. Um,
Mm.
so that's different than wallowing in the past or blaming your parents or anything like that. And then he was able to do things like his mother was worried after the divorce from his first wife that he wasn't capable of taking care of their three kids because he was doing a lot of that.
Yeah.
He just conveyed factually some of the things he was doing with the kids, and his mother did a flip. Both parents apologized. You know, it was one of those things where just the quest for facts and conveying facts both ways uh, made the correction to the victim mentality.
Yeah. What would be what people tend to do when they're not when they're doing the opposite of gathering facts?
Well, they often, you know, being in contact family with family evokes anxiety, so they minimize it or cut off altogether,
Mm,
extreme case, or keep it superficial when they're in contact with their original family. Um, or they confront them. You know, you guys were terrible parents. You know, I couldn't do anything right, even though I didn't do anything wrong. You know, uh, that kind
a
of
version of blaming your parents type of thing.
exactly, exactly. So this is
And
trying to put it on a more factual basis and really managing self in relation to them,
mm,
so they can be a resource.
yeah, I find it such a more such a useful way to think about it rather than
Mhm.
this idea of confronting one's parents and what they did, which I think is really prevalent
Yeah.
right now.
Cutting off from those toxic parents.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. This sounds like this research, the idea of being a researcher in one's own life, uh, or a researcher as a therapist for your clients, uh, is really helpful in kind of getting perspective, not getting caught up in the emotional reactivity to things as an individual or as a practitioner.
Yeah, I've done this add-on to the postgraduate program the last 2 years at the Bowen Center, and you can use this method to talk about your own effort toward differentiation. You know, establish a baseline when you first heard of the Bowen theory and began to work on yourself, and then you know what changed over time. What did you attempt with you, and you know how did you work on being more of a self with the family, and where are you a couple decades later? Some cases. I think we
Mm,
can learn a lot about the nuances of differentiation and and of therapy uh, with some disciplined clinical research.
mm,
Um, had one of the people in my advanced uh, course at Living Systems who did a very effective paper on her work with a particular client. You know, identifying some of the variables that the client was able to work on and the outcome. She and I did an interview around a presentation she did. So I think and that, and most who have tried it say that it really helps them be more thoughtful about the interrelation of theory and what they're working on in their family or with clients.
mm,
Because you know, you're being pretty intentional about it.
yeah, and it's so easy to slide into automatic or to not be intentional. And
But
um, even when you're trying to think, work on yourself and your family with theory. You know.
yeah, completely. That's right. You know, and different clinical families present different um, challenges for therapy, different levels of differentiation. You know, all the concepts of the theory can vary from one family to another, and in your own family. Um, and
Mm.
work systems are not all the same either. You know, you might one work system and then not cotton on to the emotional process in another. And so I another benefit I think of clinical research is that it has the potential to enable us to fill out Bowen's four quadrants of on the scale of differentiation. He uses,
Mm.
broad strokes to describe
Describe them.
the
Yeah.
difference in lifestyle of 0 to 25 or 25 to 50 or 50 to 75. But, he doesn't much get into the nuances between, well, what's the difference between a 25 and a 30 or a 30 and a 35? I think if we could get enough people to do this version of what was my baseline, what was I able to accomplish, what were the aspects of my life that I've been able to change in over time and make it hold up in spite of new stresses and what not. And likewise, I think we can start distributing families based on own family research and clinical research along the scale that would help to begin to nuance uh, these very broad strokes that Bowen left us with. He
Mm.
actually wrote at some point that he thought with some disciplined work, it wouldn't be too hard to fill out the scale more than.
Mm.
So I think that would be real important if we're going to do actual research using the central concept of the theory, which is differentiation. If we can't be very specific about what that looks like, how do we use it in formal research as a variable?
Yeah.
And I think we can, and that's sort of what I'm working on, looking at the core definitions of differentiation, and then the uh, derivatives of that that are more specific from family to family, and tracking those over time. I mean, if you look at the core, which he says was the variation in ability to distinguish between thinking and feeling,
Mm.
individual level, and the capacity to be in contact, good contact, emotional contact with important people in your life, especially family, and not be as governed by emotional signals you're getting from them in your own behavior so that you can be a little more separate emotionally.
Mm.
The other half of different core definition of differentiation. It's not just being able to distinguish between thinking and feeling, but being able to act on that and having the capacity to separate more of a self relationally while not distancing, and defining
Mm.
itself and all the things that go into that. But then if you get into what reflects the difference from one family to another, it's going to vary. In the family I was talking about, it had to do with the ability to be um, a self in relation to your spouse, which was,
Mm.
you know, uh, he was completely governed in many ways by the programming from the past, his interpretation of it, with his wives. And
Unable to kind of separate himself from their pleasure or displeasure with him.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. He was trying to be a good kid growing up and still getting lots of critique, and then with his spouses, this fear of losing them. So
Mm.
and so that's an emotional process that resulted in a more intense relationship with his partners and less ability to be a separate self. And so that would be, for that family, an indication of undifferentiation. And then that shift over time would be an indication that he has mostly been able to sustain, at least 50% of the time, he says. And when this impulse comes to just automatically agree, he says, oh, wait a minute now. And then he remembers, what do I really want to do? Uh,
Hmm.
so that's bringing in the separation of thinking and feeling, but in the relationship context of the relationship with the spouse.
In other words, it's not just being aware of it in your own head, it's being aware of it and being able to do something in the relationship different
Absolutely.
to have that influence your choice,
Yeah.
impact your choice.
You have more freedom, you
Yeah.
know, or an ability to think about what you want to do or not do and define yourself accordingly while maintaining good contact.
Yeah. It's my sense is we're in a world right now where um, there's not so much distinguishing differentiation between the thinking and feeling system. It appears as if there's a lot of feeling driven reactions going on between people in the world. One example that always comes to my mind is people cutting off from family because they voted for so and so. You know,
Yeah.
uh, and I'm seeing that type of reaction from people more and more. Um, how does thinking about family, talking about thinking systems in this way, uh, kind of translate into thinking about what's going on more broadly in society?
Yeah, it's a great question. Um, one of my concerns is we're going backwards on measures designed to reduce carbon emissions and global warming, at least in the United States. And, and what strong opinions, pro or con, the current administration. But rather than cutting off or, having contentious disagreements, if you can just be interested and curious about how a particular member of the family has arrived at their position, whatever it might be, um, and engage in a respectful conversation about that. That would
Mm,
be a more differentiated way of uh, engaging the polarities that are so rampant right now in society. Um, you're not trying to change anybody. You're just trying to get interested in what led them to this conclusion. That it's better that we go back to oil and coal than nuclear or electric or wind, um, or particular opinions about the current president himself and how he's going about conducting the presidency. Again, if you can separate your own emotion about all of that, many of us have strong emotions, uh,
mhm,
and not relate to the other as somebody that has to be changed or converted or chastised, but just working on better understanding how they arrived at whatever their position may be that you have take exception to. I think that's a way of one person, or hopefully more than one, um, on an individual basis, stepping outside of the emotional polarity that's so rampant right now in society. Reminds me of conversation with Dr. Bowen.
mm.
And when Ford was president and inflation was high, and a lot of anxiety about that. And Bowen mentioned sort of casually in an offhand way that, he wasn't changing his fee structure, even though cost of living was going up, as his way of trying to um, address the societal problem of inflation. Not
Mm,
as an individual, this was something he was going to do, not hike his rates, which always were affordable, but he wasn't going to let the societal um, process around inflation dictate what he did. So I think
mm,
that's an example of how, as an individual, you can separate a self from emotional process in society by drawing on theory.
yeah. It's do you get this when individuals are looking for the change to be done at a different level rather than on an individual level?
Mhm.
Uh, would that be a sign of kind of offloading responsibility in some way, or um, getting caught up in the emotional process rather than taking responsibility for what one can do?
I mean, and I think depending on people's life circumstances, there are different levels of ways one can define a self. I mean, I
Mm,
periodically, not frequently, but from time to time, I'll call our congressman um, and explain why I think cuts to cancer research are a bad idea. And, um, I have a cousin whose grant was in jeopardy, and she was working on a problem that servicemen develop cancer who've been exposed to uh, some of the chemicals that in the Iraq wars or Afghanistan. Um, and I don't know whether, it played out or some of that cancer research monies have been restored. So I think
mm,
that's one way you can do it. Another is to get involved with
yeah.
a local political party that comes closer to um, your own thinking. I've been contemplating, I haven't done anything yet, of writing a series of speeches that draw on Bowen theory without mentioning the theory as a
Mm,
way of kind of conveying the responsibility of a citizen to really think more
uh,
objectively, regardless of your political party or ideology, to be focused more on facts, and principles and trying to use facts and principles and knowledge to think through where you stand on policies, uh,
mm,
like, and that unless that happens and people aren't um, swept along by emotional triggers in the political discourse, um, then political emotion will carry the day.
mm,
The more people can begin to say, part of my responsibility as a citizen is to really hear what is being said in the public forum, but think through where I stand, what the facts are,
mm,
what do I believe, what principles are at stake here, and then sort of like the old beliefs paper that Dr. Bowen had us write, where you take a
yeah.
topic, you just sort of group, had a belief you absorbed uncritically from your family or society or church or whatever. What are the facts about that? And
Mm,
and then if you think it through for yourself, what the principles at stake are in this particular area, and then where do you come out?
mm.
I think that's part of the responsibility of a citizen in a democratic republic.
That makes that makes a ton of sense to me, Rand. Uh, I was just thinking, how can people do that? I think it's easy to do that when it's how I'm different from the other side. I think it's harder to do that when it's my principles are telling me. I might be disagreeing about something within the group I'm in.
Mhm.
But I think it would make such a difference if people would could do that, would do that,
Mhm.
operate that way. Of, what are the principles
I'm sorry.
of what are the principles that I'm operating from
Right.
that's guiding me?
Yep. Yep. Yeah. And of course, Bowen's notion of solid self is that you think through what you believe on the basis of fact and principle, and that it's consistent with other beliefs that make up solid self, which are principles and beliefs and uh, that you're prepared to act on regardless of pressure, either emotional pressure from within or from without. Um, so, people who are people of faith, um, the Bible is pretty clear about the dangers of pursuing wealth, and the jeopardy that can place one's soul in, one's, and and yet the Bible has been, I think, twisted in a way that says, well, getting wealth is an evidence of God's favor.
Mm.
Well, that's not what the Bible says. That's not what Jesus is saying. And yet they'll quote Jesus in favor of, you know, getting harsh with immigrants. And that's not what the larger biblical tradition holds, that you welcome the sojourner, the stranger, because you may be a sojourner and a stranger someday, and were in the case of the Jewish people.
Mhm.
Um, so, and Jesus, with some of his parables, like the Good Samaritan, that what people may not realize is that the Samaritan who helped the person in the ditch that had been beaten up, um, Samaritans were enemies of the Jews. There was a lot of animosity between the Jewish people and Samaritans at the time. So here you have an
Mm.
enemy rescuing a Jew. And that sort of dislocates the usual boundaries that existed at the time. So, injunctions like love your neighbor or love your enemy and pray for those who persecute you, all that. Where is that in public discourse? And why aren't clergy and priests, you know, punching that up as part of the public discourse? Now, the Catholic Church has recently done that with
Mm.
immigrants. But what about some of these other faith leaders?
I hear you. What does it take for people to apply their principles across the board?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yep.
Uh, Randy, s- what's been something in theory that you grabbed onto that helped you make a small shift in your life that's made a big difference for you?
Yeah, that's another good question. Um, I mentioned earlier that I had a lot of anxiety about getting married,
Uh-huh.
in the history of divorces. And as Mary and I approached a marriage date we had set, I was getting more and more anxious. And I realized from a systems perspective that I wasn't just carrying my anxiety about marriage, but the family was anxious about marriage. And
Uh,
there was a focus on, married, to some extent. And so I figured, how do I put anxiety back into the system? I mean, I can deal with my own anxiety in responsible ways, but this other stuff is also affecting me. So I did a series of reversals. with my dad and stepmother and mother and stepfather. And I go to my parents and say, I don't think I can afford to get married. And I said, well, why is that? Cost of security at the marriage ceremony to keep you and mom from killing each other is going to be prohibitive. Because every time they showed up, there was tension. Um, or I go around and predict, yeah, I'm doomed. Look at all the divorces in the family. This marriage doesn't stand a chance. And of course, they get around to the other side. Well, you're your own person, and just because everybody else got divorced doesn't mean. But the point was that it was punching up what was an
Under
underlying
the
source of tension and anxiety, which nobody was talking about.
mm,
That was, I thought, an important way to use the upcoming marriage as an opportunity to put some of the anxiety back into the system so I wasn't carrying it all.
mm. So when it's the anxiety under the surface about marriage, the fact that people have been divorced, there was worry, concern, whatever it is, pressure. Uh, that what the tension under the surface was pressurizing this marriage that was going to take place for you. It was coming down to you in some way.
Right. That's right.
And got it. And so you just you bringing it to the surface was saying, "Hey, I'm not going to take this on here. This is you guys play with it."
Yeah, without saying that.
Yeah, yeah, without saying it. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um,
Uh, that's it's so interesting. So if it's not under the surface, it is less of a it's less pressurized in some way. Is that the idea? Yeah.
yeah, and both my dad and mom said, we can handle ourselves. We're not going to embarrass you, or we're not going to create a scene at the wedding. And so they were having to take some responsibility too for how they showed up. And
Mm,
so that was around the wedding ceremony itself. There would be other examples of, when we had our first kiddo, my stepfather was afraid that he was going to break uh, some of the things that were valuable to my mother and him, but he refused to put them out of reach of a toddler. And but he kept the focus up. My wife was getting pretty fed up with this. And but I thought, this is my family. This is something I have to address. And so, um, how did I do that? I conveyed to my mother that, we don't like to create problems for you and your husband. So till the kid gets a lot older, we just won't come around. Well,
mm,
she was invested in seeing her grandson. And so she, dealt with her husband. So the next time we go visit, he took a hotel room, so he wasn't there. But he was on the phone. Uh, has anything been broken yet? And so he was there even though he wasn't there.
yeah.
So the next effort was to say, well, again, we're just creating problems for you and your husband, and we don't want to do that. So unless Larry can stick around when we come visit, we won't be coming. So next time we come, he was there. Uh, so it's just sort of using triangles and taking a position that wasn't critical per se, but just defining what you were going to do under certain circumstances, and then the other gets to decide what they want to do.
Mm,
So that was trying to get the focus off of my wife and son by my mother and stepfather. Because I thought I have a principle that when in-laws, mother, father-in-laws, and a spouse get into it, um, it has to do with something that the biological adult child hasn't addressed with their parents. And so my taking it on got her off the hook. And, you know, then our son was less the anxious focus.
I think that would be a good thing to apply on a societal level too. How can we, rather than passing down anxiety from one generation to the next, how can we pass down some wisdom
Yeah, and live it and,
and
and
live it?
man off accordingly.
Yeah.
Not just tell others how they ought to be living. Um, what a difference it would make, if people could use the I instead of the you and really speak from a solid place without being critical of anybody else.
Yeah. Well, sounds like you're making your effort.
I
So
am
I
indeed.
appreciate that, Randy.
Wow, you've got me talking more personally than I usually do with these sorts of things, but I've enjoyed it and I hope it's
Me too. It's been a pleasure, Randy. Thank you so much.
okay. Thank you. Bye for now.